Good day and welcome to this Focus on Special with myself, David Rademeyer. We are here at a sunny yet windy Madagascar attending the Africa50 General Shareholders Meeting, where key stakeholders assemble to discuss one key topic, renewable energy, and the best way to fund these bankable projects. Let's listen in on this. The Africa50 Acceleration Fund, you have raised over $200 million thus far. In saying that, hoping to raise more, what kind of projects would you ideally like to distribute these funds to?
Yeah, first of all, Africa50 Infrastructure Acceleration Fund is a $500 million fund, and we've achieved first close back in December last year. We raised $222.5 million from mostly African institutional investors. In fact, we have 16 African institutional investors plus the IFC, the International Finance Corporation, who backed us at the first close. I'd like to mention the African Development Bank, which was one of the investors, but also two African sovereign wealth funds, African pension funds, and insurance companies. We're very pleased that we were able to gather so many African institutional investors, and then we hope that as we look towards the second close, we can get more African institutional investors, but also additional global investors, because of course we don't have enough money right here in Africa to close all of our infrastructure gap. So I wanted to start with that. Now, we think we can deploy this project across a few sectors. Energy is obviously a sector that we need to address, because the energy challenge, both supply and access, we see it across so many countries. Even in your own country in South Africa, we're facing electricity challenges. And we don't have to do that, because people and businesses in Africa are willing to pay for electricity, reliable electricity. So one of the sectors that we are targeting is electricity, energy. But we're also targeting sectors such as ICT, information communication technology. We need to make sure that we increase the penetration of internet connectivity on this continent. This continent will not be developed without having a much higher access to internet connectivity. So we're looking at data centers, cable, broadband connectivities, you name it. I think we can invest as long as those projects are bankable. Now, we are also looking at social infrastructure, meaning education infrastructure, health infrastructure. You may have seen some of the projects that we discussed earlier today. We started with energy. We invested in 400 megawatt solar project in Egypt. Right here in Madagascar, we're looking at investing in a 120 megawatt hydro project called Volobe. So we were talking with the authorities here to try to fast track this project. But you may also know, because it's publicly available information, that we invested together with MTN subsidiary called Baobab on a $300 million fiber project that will connect the eastern shores of Africa to the western shores of Africa in order to facilitate, again, broadband penetration on the continent. So these are the things that this fund, but also other Africa50's funds, because remember, Africa50 has a number of funds. The Acceleration Fund is one such fund, but we also have other funds.
And also earlier you spoke about innovative financing, and it's not the first time I hear recycling projects that can help formulate this kind of innovative funding. Could you just expand on that just a little bit I just could get more clarity from you?
Yeah. Look, we are extremely excited about asset recycling. We started to promote this idea a few years ago, and we worked with a number of African governments who are shareholders of Africa50, and we are pleased to announce that we closed our first asset recycling transaction in Africa. It's actually the first one in Africa. In the Senegambia Bridge, which is an asset that the government had financed, but the Minister of Finance and us, Africa50, we agreed that the money could be used better by recycling it. So the government agreed to grant a concession to Africa50. The proceeds of the concession would then be used by the government to fund new assets. This is how you recycle the money, which is otherwise immobilized into an asset. You basically create liquidity out of an asset. And the other benefit that you get in asset recycling is that you transfer the management of the asset to the private sector, which will be a bit more efficiently manage the asset. And that's what we have achieved in the Gambia. The Minister of Finance of the Gambia joined our shareholders meeting a few hours ago. He was very excited. He recommended asset recycling to the other ministers that were also in the room. And we have a number of transactions that we are working on. Some of them are public, like in Togo, in West Africa. We have two roads, Lomé-Palibé Road and also the RN2, which is the road between Lomé and Cotonou, Benin, which was financed. These roads were financed by the government, and now the government wants to monetize these assets by granting a concession to Africa50 and our partners. We will pay the government the proceeds for the concessioning, and the government will use those proceeds to invest in new assets. So you're just creating a virtuous circle by government funding, de-risking, recycling, funding new projects. We believe this is going to garner a lot of momentum on this continent, and Africa50 will be there to support our government.
Today we found out about the Valobi hydro project. When do you foresee that project start taking place, and what kind of impact will that have for Madagascar's energy sector?
Yes, the hydroelectric project that you heard today is still in the financial closing process. We intend to finish that closing process around November of 2025 and start the project after that financial closing. Yeah.
How do you see that impacting Madagascar's job sector? Because Africa is historically a youthful population, and essentially we want to train the youth or develop youth to get into the sector because they will be the ones who have to maintain it in the future. So how do you see that impacting job employment to start off with, and secondly bringing the youth as part of the development?
We can say that youth is an advantage for a country, and Africa in general and Madagascar in particular, we have a population under 25 in age, so we have many, workforce to use for the development of Madagascar. So those workforce have to be, first of all, maintained and have to be trained for the development.
From your perspective, from OPEC Fund's perspective, what do you see is the global investors' appetite to move the entire strategy over to cleaner energy, knowing that we are still reliant on fossil fuel, and in the same breath, OPEC's strategy to make the same movement?
Yeah, thank you, David, for the question. I mean, we see nowadays there's a lot of emphasis for multilateral development financial institutions as well as its investors to move towards renewable energy, clean energy. And for OPEC Fund ourselves, our strategy is to achieve 40% of our approvals until 2030. So this is what we plan to achieve. Now we're at around more than 30%. I believe it's around 33 or 34%. So we should be able to achieve clean or climate finance by 2030 or 40%. That's how I see it, yeah.
Now, the panel that you particularly sat on, the discussion was around restructuring finances, and particularly Africa's debts, how to restructure that and find more inventive ways to finance its own bankable projects. From your view, what realistically can be done for Africa to restructure their debt accordingly?
Yeah, no, thank you. I think there's two sides of it. One is for them to potentially recycle the debt. So you have existing projects in the system, which if there's a need, once the project is done, it could, one, sell down the asset by the shareholders, or somehow get other lenders to come in and provide the necessary financing at that stage. So for us, we've done one recently in Uganda, so where we quote unquote like refinance an existing investor, so that funding can be used for other purposes within the region. And there's a lot of discussion nowadays about asset recycling, which I think in the panel before mine, there was discussion about transmission line or power projects, even bridge infrastructure that can be done in that manner. So supporting the government to free up, to provide financing for the government so that funding can be utilized for other renewable energy projects in the system.
Does that form part of what is known as carbon credits, or is that a separate entity altogether?
I think that would be separate. Carbon credit would be, for them to sell it's basically getting a loan for the reduction of emission. But here the context is basically when there are projects and it's ready and it's already in operation, potentially these projects can be sold down. Or another solution is for the government. Let's say they have existing power projects in the country where they want to sell these assets to private investors to operate, and then later on that funding could be utilized to finance other projects in the country. So these are the different types of financing mechanism that's available in the market today. Yeah.
Before we get into the details of the Vlobere hydrogen project, just maybe explain to us briefly the corporate structure for you, all the shareholders, everybody is connected towards this project.
Yes, for sure. CGHV, Compagnie Générale d'Hydroélectricité de Vlobere, has been founded in 2016. At that time, today, there is two shareholders. On one hand, Africa50, and on the other hand, Action Group, Madagascar Group, developing the project with me, with the team. HPP for upstream Vlobere, so a hydropower project of upstream Vlobere. This is a 120 megawatt project located close to Toamasina, the harbor, the main harbor of Madagascar, 30 kilometers far from this town. It will generate approximately an average of 750 gigawatt hour per year, which represent approximately 30-35% of today's consumption of all the island. So it will bring really lots of energy in addition, and will allow, one, the growth of economy, but also it will save petrol in order to produce electricity. So it will be really a game changer for the country.
What are the timelines you're looking at, as in when you expect to start with the project, and when are you aiming to finalize this project off?
Okay, so the project has started in 2016. Mm-hmm. Okay, we've performed all the technical, social, environmental studies, legal studies, financial studies to demonstrate that this project is a good project for the country. As such, we have signed with the government in 2023 the concession agreement, and with the off-taker, Chirama, PPA. Today we have signed a grant agreement with DFC, which will allow us to have a financing to go to the financial closure, which is forecasted at the end of next year. As such, we will start the works in 2026. during 40 months, and then we will be able to produce electricity for the country.
And the ultimate goal here is to provide skilled employment and to provide youth development to be part of this project, because this is an ongoing project. So you need to upskill your youth to oversee the maintenance of the project going forward.
Yes. You're completely right. This type of project has a huge impact on the skills in general of the country. We have the chance in Madagascar and close to Toamasina that there is already a big mining company with lots of skills which has been developed for 15 years. Nevertheless, we will need to anticipate specific skills for hydro, probably 2 years before the commissioning, by hiring people and giving them specific skills. In addition to that, we are working with the government of Madagascar to put in place a dedicated structure for, I would say, professionalization and employment needed during the works themselves, because we will need to have approximately between 1,000 and 1,500 people working on site. We know that there are some needs, even if it will be offshore companies, because there are no particular skills doing dams, doing underground works, turbines, and etc. So we will need to import, I would say, the top management of people, but we need to anticipate to see how to make possible to employ as much as possible local people. And this is really an objective for us, to be as much as possible inclusive on this project.
We witnessed today the signing ceremony between the European Union and Madagascar government about the Volobi hydrogen project. Just unpack that a little bit more for me. How much is the European Union investing into this project?
Look, for the time being, what we have signed today is a letter of comfort. So it's an intention letter, signaling the fact that the European Union is going to contribute to this extremely important project. So now we're still in the mechanics of, putting the project together with the government and different partners. But what I signed today on behalf of the European Union is a very concrete signal that the EU is ready to commit money. The amount is not yet, finalized, because we're still discussing with the government about what are the needs, what is the amount, what is the scope of our intervention. But what we know so far is that we're going to blend, grants and concessional loans through the European Investment Bank and through the European Union institutions. So it's going to be a massive project. I can't give you a number on this one, but what I can tell you is that for the time being in the energy sector, the EU is giving about 170 million euros for the energy sector, and we're going to, increase that substantially with this project.
Are there any other countries on the Africa continent that the European Union is looking to invest for this renewable energy? And I'm asking this on the back that renewable energy is the key of energy in the future. However, we are still very fossil fuel heavy. So what other explorations is the European Union interested in?
Look, you're entirely right. We have a very strong green agenda in Africa, but also in Europe and across the world. So what we're trying to do is to support partners, to help them transition into a greener, energy production and get away from fossil fuels. And the Volobi project is one of these pieces in the big jigsaw that we also operate on in other parts of Africa. What we try to do is not only working nationally with the different countries in Africa to help them transitioning, but also interconnecting. And we have a big project called, the Global Gateway, which is precisely putting the emphasis on creating infrastructure between the different countries of Africa in the energy sector, but also in other sectors like digitalization and others, transport. And we're trying to give a contribution to that. What is important to say is that we are not the only ones. The EU is a very important, very often the first or second partner of African countries in terms of trade and development, but we are not alone. So we need to partner with other countries, with other organizations, in order to create a critical mass of weight, of financial weight, to be able to have an impact.
Yesterday was quite a fruitful event. There was a few agreements that were signed, few commitments that were made. But before we get to that, I just want to gain more clarity from Africa50 perspective, your mission and vision to steer investments towards renewable energy, because it's not a new concept. It's been going, the discussion's been going on for years now, but now it's being accelerated. So I just want to gain clarity from Africa50's perspective, that mission as to why accelerating this conversation.
So I think let's start by Africa50's mission. Africa50's mission is to accelerate the investment into infrastructure broadly on the continent. Importantly, to drive the bankability of projects. A huge need on this continent where we don't have enough bankable infrastructure projects for investors to deploy capital into. So that's really our mission. Drive the development of bankable projects, accelerate investment into infrastructure on the continent, and thirdly, mobilize capital into infrastructure on the continent. The focus and drive that we currently have, specifically in Madagascar, around renewable energy is really because we've been working with the government in identifying what their strategic priorities are. And power and renewable energy is such. And you're correct. I think there is a big focus on renewable energy. As we're all aware, Africa is hardest hit by the climate crisis. So what is it that we do and how is it that we support One Africa as Africa50, as an institution that has been set up by African countries? How is it that we support them, one, with their strategic priorities, importantly with mitigating whatever crises that they're facing, climatic, financial, or otherwise. And that's really our role. And from where I'm sitting and where we sit as Africa50, infrastructure is the backbone of any economy, right? Without the road infrastructure, without the electricity, there is no grounds for development. And so to us, it's really critical that we support our shareholders in that.
Now, it's interesting that despite the fact that Africa's carbon emission is the lowest in the world, but we as African are trying to drive that renewable infrastructure, which is critical because, as we know, we have also the least amount of citizens, African citizens, that has access to electricity. So that's off the bat is very important to know. But you talk about bankable projects. What is considered a bankable project from Africa50's perspective?
So for us, a bankable project is very simply a project that investors believe has been sufficiently de-risked to be able to invest in and deploy capital into. A project where the sponsors and the developers have the track record, have done it before, and a project that we believe can go into commercial operations. So simply that's how we look at bankable project. Have the risks been identified? Have we been able to mitigate those risks accordingly? Have the people who need to assume the risk, be it between government, be it the sponsors, be it the financiers, has that risk been allocated appropriately? And do we believe we can execute on that project? And the only way, the test and measure of that, is really financiers coming in and saying, I'm willing to lend against this project, because all of those factors have come together. The regulatory framework, I'm comfortable with the regulatory framework, and I'm good to go.
You touched on finances, which is a big hurdle for most African countries, because Africa's debt is quite high compared to the FDIs that receive. What innovative finance strategies or tools do you think is available to help restructure Africa's debt so they can use that funding to fund these projects that can attract more investment or more partnerships?
You touch on something and a topic that's, I'm going to use the word topical again, right? But it's something that many of our governments, many of our leaders are grappling with, and which is the indebtedness of our continent, right? Right now, many of our countries are at levels such as, at 65% GDP or debt to GDP, spending a lot of their revenues that they receive on servicing the debt. A large part of it because it's denominated in foreign currency. So a huge problem for many of us, providing very limited fiscal room for our governments to deploy into infrastructure and into critical areas such as education or health. And thank you for the question, because as Africa50, these are things that we think about, right? How is it that we support our shareholders? So a couple of innovations, we call them innovations, but they've been done elsewhere before. So for us, it's important to say what's been done elsewhere that we can adapt to our environment. And one of the things we talked about quite extensively during our annual General Shareholders Meeting is asset recycling. And what we're saying to our governments, to our shareholders, is there's no need to own commercial assets. You have locked capital in those commercial assets. So how is it that we can monetize it for you? So one of the innovations, one of what we've been talking about, the instruments we've been talking about, is asset recycling. So we would come in as Africa50 together with partners, work with the government to concession that specific asset, release capital to the government for them to redeploy and reinvest into additional infrastructure. We're very excited. We've just closed our first transaction on asset recycling with the government of the Gambia. And this is the Senegambia Bridge, which connects the northern part of the Gambia and the southern part of the Gambia to Senegal. Critical infrastructure, where as Africa50, we've monetized this for the government. Importantly, we'll be providing the operations and maintenance, assisting with ensuring that we bring transparency to revenue collection. Whatever revenue leakage may have been there, we will make sure that we close that revenue leakage, improve the facility itself to ensure that it's operated at the highest standards possible.
And that's how we wrap up this episode of Focus On with myself, Deodoro Ahmed, reporting all the way from Antananarivo, Madagascar. Until next time, goodbye.